This, I have to say, is an interesting time. I remarked up here when I came to the trustee welcome back that if I paraphrase our Prime Minister, there's not a more exciting time to be a member of CEDA. Well, that's right, but whether the excitement in Australia in terms of politics and the economic future of our country is going to be as exciting as perhaps he would want us to believe, that's a matter for discussion. I think a lot of that's going to come out, and you'll hear that in our presentations today. This report is sensational, I have to say. If you haven't read it online overnight, I'm sure you will. If you've got a hard copy here, you'll take it away. It's a page turner. It will not put you to sleep. It says some very wonderful things, even some of the Nostradamus-like predictions about what's going to happen in the economy and what's going to happen politically, they may actually come to fruition and dovetail. We have a pretty good record of this. But look, in a very serious way, if we take the economic chapter, I mean, what Michael Blythe from the Commonwealth Bank is saying effectively is that there's no chance of recession in Australia, although there were some doomsayers last year suggested there would be. Secondly, I think there are some headwinds that the Australian economy is confronting, but effectively they are often beyond our control and they're international. What's happening in China at the moment? I mean, people are trying to second guess as to what the real figure of GDP growth is in that economy. People are trying to second guess what the direction that the government will set in trying to reset it from an exporting economy to one that really is domestically focused, consumer focused. And some of the reporting coming out over the last week or so would throw some of that into question. And of course, from Australia's perspective, 25 years of uninterrupted economic growth, big tick, fabulous. Doesn't matter who the government is, we were able to sustain that all the way through. But the issue has been, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, that most of that's been underpinned by a resources boom. A resources boom where we had an economy, China, that could buy as much as we could rip out of the ground. We had commodity prices that were astronomical. And you only have to think back 12 months ago, 18 months ago, iron ore was selling at about $120, $150 a tonne. It's down less than 40 now. And so these sorts of things have an impact on us. The price of oil at the moment, I mean, there's pumping oil out like there's no tomorrow, but the cost, the barrel cost of oil has come right down. So there's a whole raft of external factors and some shock factors that Michael Blythe is going to talk about, I'm sure, over lunch as well, that form part of our economic chapter that will impact on Australia. Who knows what's going to happen in the United States, for example? I mean, if you have a look at the major contenders for the presidency, well, I've got to say, geez, I'm glad I live in Australia. But quite frankly, what happens in the United States around growth? What happens in the United States affects the rest of the world, as does China. So there's external factors are going to be quite significant. When we look at what's happening in our own economy at the moment, one of the things that we've very much been talking about in recent times is just where business confidence happens to be. And the sad thing is, I think the business confidence is trending down, notwithstanding the change to a Prime Minister that I think most of the business community thought was going to be energised and deliver some really great things and talked up innovation and talked up things that mattered. But I think a lot of that confidence is starting to wane. If you happen to be a member of the Australian community, for example, that made any form of submission around taxation changes, you'd be mightily disappointed now. Doesn't matter if you're ACOS, doesn't matter if you're the Business Council of Australia. The fact that the government consistently now rules out one thing after another. We did have a very large table that the Prime Minister said everything was on. But what we see now is that the table's still there, but what's on it, you need a microscope to see what's going to be left. So I think the time for action, and I'd like to think, as we've said in our report, is going to come, and the first semblance of that will be at the budget. Now, we had the Treasury yesterday give a National Press Club address that set some of the parameters of that. We've got a representative of Federal Treasury with us today, and we'll hear something more probably about the direction of that. But of course, there are limiting factors, and consumer confidence apparently is bubbling along a little bit. But the housing industry in this country, there's got to be some questions about how much that will sustain us over the next 12 months. Why do I say that? Well, for a start, APRA has imposed a 10% cap on investment lending by banks in this country. for investment properties in this country. Now that's having an immediate effect now, I can tell you. It's having an effect on people willing to invest. The idea was to try and stop some foreign investment coming in, but I think it's got an impact as well. Secondly, what's on the table is discussion around issues like negative gearing. We've got one side of politics suggesting a certain way to go. It was rubbish by the government, and then suddenly they came out and started talking about a different way that they were going to tackle negative gearing. So clearly it's one of the things that's still on the table. But a comprehensive taxation reform regime is not there. And I think this is one of the factors that is going to impact. The other thing that CEDA is doing some work on, and we're going to release something pretty significant about this next month, is that what has been forgotten in the economic debate in this country at the moment is the nature of the Australian government deficit. And the projections in my EPO as to where that's going to go unless there's some serious economic action taken. We've got a Treasurer yesterday who said that we only simply had an expenditure problem. 2 days before that, the Secretary of Treasury said we had a revenue and an expenditure problem, and that is right. You've got to admit that that's the case. So on one hand, you've got a government that's going to be faced with making some hard calls around expenditure, but it's also got to be around the fact that revenue is falling because wage rises over the last 3 years have been far less than they've been in the past. And the macro economy of Australia, where growth is forecast to go at 2.75%, not shabby at all. That's not bad considering the rest of the world. But 2.75%, cash rates set by the Reserve Bank at 2%, and inflation just above 2%, this is an environment that we haven't lived through before. And so the decisions that government is going to have to make, whether it be at budget time or over the next few years, is going to impact very solidly on what will happen to the budget deficit. CEDA's view is that that needs to be closed sooner rather than later, and as I say, we'll make some comment about that. If I conclude, though, a couple of comments very quickly on the politics side of things. Why wouldn't I? But a long time since I've been in it, so I've become much more agnostic, sort of. The fact is that, you know, our political chapter says that the Turnbull government will be re-elected. And, you know, if you have $5 and you're lazy $5 down to Ladbrokes or something, put it on Turnbull, you'd probably be right. But, and there's always a but in this, I think expectations around the change in Prime Minister are starting to be questioned because of the activity and the action that government is doing. And a lot of reviews have been put on the back burner, whether it be taxation reform, green and white papers, whether it be Commonwealth-state relations with the new federation. I mean, all these things were there and something had to be done. And it's great to be talking about innovation, absolutely. And CEDA's written papers about this, and I'm personally committed to it and so on. But we need to see action match the rhetoric that's there. Now, you know, politics being politics, you've got two sides of the game here now. One, of course, that's only been in opposition for a relatively short period of time. A leader that's not necessarily all that popular in the community compared to a Prime Minister whose, you know, ratings are pretty stratospheric. That's political capital. And that's political capital that should be expended. And our view would be it can be expended if some hard decisions are made, because some hard decisions need to be made as Australia adjusts economically. Coming off a resources boom, looking at other things in the Australian economy that are going to sustain us. And our report goes into some of those. It does talk about things like advanced manufacturing. Again, CEDA reported on that a couple of years ago. It does talk about where the value of the dollar is and what that could mean for us. Certainly attractive from the tourist industry is concerned, and here in Queensland, wouldn't that be a great boon? We should see more of that happening now. So all of these factors, while they have an economic imperative, there is a political imperative that sits above it. It's about the will to do something that makes Australia economically strong. It's about sustaining our economy as we go forward. It is about political will to take some hard decisions. We've got one of the best salesmen we've had for some time. I mean, this was the strength of Malcolm Turnbull as a salesman. I would like to think that that skill is going to be used to tell us, the Australian people, why certain hard decisions need to be taken, why everything potentially can still be put back on the table, because at the end of the day, politics is going to have to generate a narrative around where the Australian economy needs to go. We are at a critical time. We're at a very critical time. So, take the document with you tonight, read it before you go to bed. As I say, it's a page turner, will not put you to sleep. You'll want another copy to pass on to somebody that you know, and we're more than happy to make that available to you. But my job now really is to simply introduce our first speaker, Julie Toth. And the background of all of the speakers in here today, I'm not going to go through it again, but please welcome Julie. Thank you.